Recently, I was having a conversation, actually right here on this stage with James. We were up here. I don't know what we were doing. We were doing something. He was doing something. I was probably sitting on the couch. It's probably the truth of the matter. But as we were talking together, we were talking about clergy attire. We were talking about clergy attire, and we talked about, what is expected of clergy pastors to wear all the time. And you all have come to expect that I wear a St. James shirt. That's pretty much, friends in the world can remember what my name is, because they say I just wipe out the saint part, and I know who you are. I think, I'm not sure I like that idea that you completely wipe out the saint part, but, I get it. I get it. We were talking about clergy collars, and I have a Roman collar. And if you've ever seen me in a Roman collar, it probably meant you were in the intensive care unit. That's probably what it meant, because I don't wear the clergy collar very often. You had to be in a location that's difficult for me to get into. It had nothing to... Now, of course, the problem is usually when somebody sees me come into their room with the clergy collar on, their eyes already get bigger because they've never seen me, first of all, in a suit, let alone with a clergy collar on. They're like, oh, this has got to be bad. No, it has nothing to do with being bad. It has completely to do with what I look like on the outside, so that I can get into the place that I need to be. It's purely like wearing a name badge. Like if you're going into your job and you're required to wear one of those cool badges that you swipe or that you touch or that says who you are. That kind of outward thing is important to some people, and it matters. I remember when I first came into ministry, and this was a long time ago. I first came into ministry, I was about 19, and I was serving at a church in Charlottesville, at Hinton Avenue United Methodist Church in downtown Charlottesville. And I was the assistant to the pastor for 6 months, and then I became the associate pastor after I went to licensing school. But my senior pastor, who was really my first mentor in ministry, told me that what was most important was the things you did on the outside. What you wore, I remember going to pick up something from him at 8:30 at night. He called me and said, I need you to pick something up to take with you when you go to the visit you're going to do first thing tomorrow morning. I said, sure, I'll come on by. So I come by, and, I was a college student at the time at UVA. So I came by, I was in my jeans, and I had like a torn T-shirt or something like that. He answers the door in a suit, 8:30 at his house, in a suit. And I'm thinking, okay, you're making a statement here. And so there was a time in my ministry you would not have known me, because in my early years of ministry, I wore a suit all the time. I was constantly in a suit. I had like 8 suits. You never saw me without a suit. I slept in a suit. I ate in a suit. I showered in a suit. I swam in a suit. I was in a suit all the time because it was about the outside. Now, we're going to talk today about 3 folks from the book of Daniel. Their names are really Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. However, as soon as they were taken into the Babylonian captivity, they were given new names. And they might be names you've heard, or they might not be names you've heard. We've been trying to choose people that are called that you might not have heard of: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, if you've ever watched the VeggieTales, Rack, Shack, and Benny. But if you've never watched the VeggieTales, it makes no sense to you what I just said, so you can ignore all of that. They were in Babylonian captivity, and one of the first things to do when you take someone into captivity and you want to break their spirit is you tell them that who they are doesn't matter. And the first thing you do is you take away their name. You take away their name. When we enslaved persons of color from Africa, the first thing we did when we got here is change their African names to some kind of Americanized name. Native Americans, when they were sent away to the schools that were supposed to educate them, cut their hair, changed their names. They were no longer wind in his hair. It was John or Bob or something Christianized. We took away their identity. So the very first thing that the king did when the Israelite people were taken into captivity in Babylon, especially if you were going to be in a place of leadership and if you were going to matter, was to change your name. From your Hebrew name, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And somehow the king thought that by changing the name, what people saw on the outside, that he could change who you were on the inside. Now, what's interesting is before we get to the passage that we're going to be reading from Daniel chapter 3, it's interesting that right after they changed their name, now the book of Daniel is written with the name of one of the four guys that's named in the book. We're only talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but Belteshazzar was Daniel's name in Babylon. Now, I've already added way too many names to the table and made this a confusing sermon. We're going to get beyond there. Just pretend like, imagine you went to work tomorrow, whatever work is for you, and the first thing your boss said to you is, you are no longer X. I'm changing your name to Y. How would you feel about that? Well, I probably wouldn't be very good, but would that really change who you are as a person? Would that really change who you are as a person? I want to say to you something that I recognize in this book, and that is calling begins on the inside, not the outside. That calling is something about your identity. It's about who you are. It's about who you're wired to be on the inside. So, right after renaming them, he renames them because they're going to be serving, they're going to be lifted, they're scholars, and he's going to specially train them for 3 years to work in the royal court. And so he renames them so that they will fit in to the royal court, so they can be trained, and then he's going to feed them the best food from the king's table. Only for the Israelite men in this particular story, the Israelite men, the food they were going to feed them was not in keeping with their religious practice. So the very first thing I noticed as I was preparing this message was in chapter 1, and it begins in verse 9. Now Daniel is the one who speaks up, but the same is true for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. Daniel decided he wouldn't pollute himself with the king's rations or the royal wine, and he appealed to the chief official in hopes that he wouldn't have to do so. So he asked to just be fed vegetables. And that's what they ate, just vegetables. And he said, now listen, I don't want you to get in trouble with the king, so just watch. I'm just going to eat vegetables. We're just going to eat these vegetables that you've given us, and we'll be great. Check us out in a week. It's actually longer than a week, but check us out. We'll be fine. Checks them out. They're perfectly fine. They decided that they were going to continue to practice their faith in a way that would shape them. So, I want us to take a step back before I read the next part of the passage and think for a second in this particular passage about two things. It occurs to me three things about calling. I've already said the first one, and the first one is that your calling begins with your identity, with who you are on the inside. No one can change that about you. They can't beat it out of you. They can't change your name. They can think they've broken you. And sometimes I think society does think it's broken us. And we're drawn in to whatever side of things may be. Sometimes we're raised in a family that teaches us to behave in one way. And we grow up and decide we should behave a different way. And sometimes we're raised in a family that teaches us to grow in a whole different way. And we grow up and say, well, they were right about this and they were wrong about that. We have the opportunity to discover who our identity is in God and then to live it out. Now, what's interesting about this is while identity begins on the inside, can't be changed on the outside, it is reflected in the way we behave. People will see it in you. People will see it in you, but it begins on the inside. They'll know if it's true. I can't tell you, one of our core values at St. James is authenticity. We want you to be real. We don't want you to come on Sunday morning and put a little smile on your face and pretend like life is great. If life stinks for you right now, we expect you to look like life stinks for you. You know, okay, maybe not, don't come in with this, okay, but I don't know what to tell you to do now. Just be authentic. That's enough. That's enough. One of the things that someone once told me about what they loved about St. James in the beginning, this is way back in the 90s, was that there was a Sunday morning when they rolled out of bed and it was 15 minutes before worship. And first of all, they knew 15 minutes before 11, worship wasn't going to start at 11. We were going to maybe be singing some songs, but they'd be okay to get here at 11:05. Second of all, they didn't have to take a shower to show up at church. We're not encouraging you to skip it for like 6 weeks or something like that and then come, but, if that's the way it works out, fine. What we are saying is, come as you are, be who you are. If you're struggling, then say to someone, I'm struggling, talk to me. Don't be afraid to say you're struggling. I told you this morning, for 5 years I've practiced the same centering prayer and meditation. And there are days when I don't feel like I'm any closer to God than I was yesterday. And then there are times when I just feel God's presence everywhere. The funny thing is, we don't get to choose when God shows up. Sometimes we're going to see it, sometimes we're not. But God is always there. God is always there. Sometimes I just can't see or feel it. So the struggle is real, being real, but people are going to see who you are. How many of us know people who claim to be wonderful Christians? And they love to claim the name. Some of them I wish they would just stop, because they give the rest of us really bad names. I'm sorry, you can't call yourself a Christian and then be hating people. That's just not working. That is not working at all. You can't call people names. It's never okay to call people names. That is not following Jesus. So, let who you are on the inside reflect out. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. Who they were on the inside, who they were in connection to God, showed on the outside. The second thing was the discipline that they followed. That whole vegetable thing that they did, it sounds like nothing to us perhaps today. But what's so much more important in our lives is the practices we practice that shape us for our everyday lives. Discipline matters. Our discipline, the way we live our lives, matters. The choices we make, because every choice we make builds on the next choice we make, builds on the next choice we make, builds on the next choice that we make. It all goes together. It all flows together. This kind of disciplined life where we adopt certain practices. Now, what's challenging to me, I was raised in the United Methodist Church. I was raised, though, in sort of, some of my teachers would be horrified for me to say this, but as I look back on it, I was raised in a sort of, all you have to do is believe mentality. And I like believing. Don't get me wrong, it's really nice, but anybody can believe in God. Jesus even says, even the demons believe. Who cares whether you believe? What you going to do about it? What you gonna do about it? It's not about what you talk, it's about what you walk. It's how you live every day. Do you know what Jesus invited people to do? Not worship him, not believe in him, follow him. Did he walk up to disciples? Believe in me. Believe in me. Hey, believe in me. People would say, believe in what? I'm seeing you right here in front of my face. There you are, sure. You're real. No, don't believe. Follow. Follow in my way. Do the things I do. Act in the way I act. Behave in that way. And the only way that happens is a lifetime of discipline. It begins whenever you want it to begin, but that lifetime of discipline. The first discipline for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was the discipline of their diet. They refused, because it was very important to them as Jews. They didn't want to forget who they were, so their diet was important. Now, let's take a look at Daniel 3, because Daniel 3 is what I told you I was going to be talking about, at least at the bottom of the printed update. And as I look at Daniel 3, let me tell you, we get another name. Nebuchadnezzar. Just the king. Let's just call it the king. We'll talk about the king, King Nebuchadnezzar. He's the head. And he builds this beautiful statue. It's 9 feet wide. It's made of gold. It's 9 feet wide. It's 90 feet tall. That's a lot of gold. That's a lot of gold. In Dungeons and Dragons, boy, we would be really happy if we found a 90-foot statue made of gold, melted it down, sold it, in one of the parties I would lead. But in any case, that's big. And the next thing he does after he builds this statue is he wants everybody to bow down. He wants everybody to bow down to the statue. Now, people are conspiring against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they recognize that they're not bowing down. They notice that they're not bowing down, that they refuse to bow down to something other than God. And so they conspire together to get rid of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they make the king make a law. And the law is, if you don't bow down to the golden God, you get thrown into the fiery furnace. Well, needless to say, one day Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not bowing down, and the people bring them before the king. So here is, picking up in verse 8. At that moment, some Chaldeans came forward, seizing a chance to attack the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king, your majesty. You gave a command that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, harp, flute, and every kind of instrument should bow down and worship the gold statue. Anyone who wouldn't bow down and worship would be thrown into a furnace of flaming fire. Now there are some Jews, ones you appointed to administer the province of Babylon, specifically Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have ignored your command. They don't serve your gods, and they don't worship the gold statue you've set up." In a violent rage, Nebuchadnezzar ordered that they bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I've set up? If you are now ready to do so, bow down and worship the gold statue, or the gold statue I've made, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, harp, flute, and every kind of instrument. But if you won't worship it, you will be thrown straight into the furnace of flaming fire. Then what God will rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered King Nebuchadnezzar, "We don't need to answer your question. If our God, the one we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of flaming fire and from your power, your majesty, then let him rescue us. But if he doesn't, know this for certain, your majesty, we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. Save us or not, whether our God saves us or not, we will not bow to your idols." We won't. That's who we are. Notice how that strength of character comes from within, how their life of practices and living out faith kind of reflects that authentically. And here's where the third piece of what I see calling is important for you to see, and that is, it's risky. It requires faith, and it is risky. There is one of the challenges I find for people who are being sold a gospel that I don't find in the Bible is that the promise of you say yes to God, God is going to safely protect you at every corner, that nothing bad will ever happen in your life. And that is simply not a scriptural reality. That is not in there. Now, as it happens, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not burned up when they were thrown in the fire. Nebuchadnezzar indeed gets mad. He fires up the furnace so hot that when the guards who are dragging Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to throw them in there, try to get close to throw them in, the guards die because it's so hot. But Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego don't. But before there was ever a promise that they would get out of the fire, they said, listen, whether God saves us or not, whether our God saves us or not, we're not bowing to your idol. That's absolute risk and absolute faith. And that's what God would like from us. God's not going to make you go down that path, but God asks you. God invites you into the kind of relationship where you're willing to take a risk. What kind of relationship is worth anything at all if you're not willing to take any risks? 26 years ago today, Linda took this amazing risk and married me. 26 years ago today, at 5:13 p.m., I think exactly, so it's not quite our 26th anniversary, coming close. She took this amazing risk, and 26 years later, and multiple permutations of who I am as a person and she as a person have changed. She is still here. She took a tremendous risk, and every day she takes a risk because she continues to be in that relationship. It's not perfect. Sometimes I say stupid things, maybe more often than sometimes. I say stupid things. I do stupid things. I don't follow through on the things I promise. I try not to make promises. I'll try is my best response, but usually I say, sure, I'll do that. And then it's like at the end of the day, and it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't do that. I'm going to go out, and when she comes home, I won't be here. I'll tell her I was really busy. Where will I go? Starbucks. Then I can be really busy drinking coffee. That sounds good. Okay, that'll work. She's still with me 26 years later. Any relationship worth entering into is worth the risk. And it's not a promise of safety. There are moments when things hang tenuously on the edge. And we have to choose, do we recommit or do we run away? And for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this was the moment of truth. They had risked it with Daniel. They only bring up Daniel, but they had risked it with Daniel to say, listen, we only want vegetables too. If you read the rest of chapter 1, you find out that's what they ate with Daniel, that they were among the numbered ones that ate this. We're going to take this little risk. Who's going to get upset if we're not taking the rich food and we're just eating, cheap vegetables? Of course, probably won't bother them at all. But when you refuse a direct command of the king who holds your life in his hand, and clearly he's a man who just flies off the handle at any given moment. I mean, it goes on from this. Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage and his face twisted beyond recognition because of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in his response, he commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times its normal heat. Wicked hot. Wicked, wicked hot. And then they threw him in. They come out on the other side, they look into the fire, and suddenly there are 4 guys, not 3. And the next thing you know, Nebuchadnezzar is proclaiming, hey, everybody respect Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. But just as easily, they could have burned up in the fire, because for them, their faith and their risk was not about whether God would save their physical presence. Part of the risk was throwing in and not knowing what would happen. That's what faith is. I don't know where God's going to show up in my everyday life. I'd like to believe I know all the time. But God is so surprising. Have you noticed that about God? Just at the moment when you most need it, there's that crocus, sad little crocus that it is, that thinks it's springtime. Only the next day it's 6 degrees. Happy little crocus, go back in the ground. But there to remind us of God's love and presence. Or it's some friend who calls you up out of the blue. Or it's some note you get in the mail or an email. Or if you don't get those kinds of things, I have a folder in my Evernote box of all the nice emails I've gotten over the years and reminders that I do this for a reason and I like doing it and God called me to do it. So every once in a while I forget that. And I open the Evernote folder and I read a few of those things that remind me why I do this. Somebody whose life has been transformed, or somebody who just says thank you out of the blue for no apparent reason. Or the sermon I thought really stank that somebody says, James, I know you didn't think the sermon was very good, but it spoke to my heart. That's what I needed to hear what you said. Because the Spirit works in spite of me, not because of me. because God takes a risk too. Now, you think that the risk is all on our side. Remember who we follow. We follow Jesus. God took a humongous risk and became vulnerable and lived among us. That's what we believe. God took a huge risk on us. God had faith in us. We failed. Unfortunately, God doesn't fail us. We fail God, though. God took a tremendous risk on us. It's a two-way street. God risks over and over again loving us with the hope we'll just love him back. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. You see, calling is something God places on our heart on the inside. It's not just one calling. I have come to learn, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, that you can be called to something now that changes as time goes by and God needs something else from you. As you grow and mature, maybe I wasn't ready when I was 22 to do certain things in ministry because I was 22. Heck, I was barely able to tie my shoes. Now that I'm 55, maybe there are some things God thinks I'm ready for. And maybe if I live to be 70, God will say, now's about that time. You're about ready to do this other thing I have for you. Calling changes, but our identity in God is always there, and it comes from the inside. It requires a discipline. So, as always, I have assignments for you. The first assignment is to figure out what disciplines you're practicing in your life that keep you close to God. What are you doing? Are you doing anything? If you're not doing anything and you're wondering why you're not getting any closer to God, I could give you a rough guess. Just a guess. If your only prayer is when that person cuts you off in traffic, Jesus Christ, then there you go. I think that you need to open up a little more of a channel. You know, I like to call Jesus' name. I call it a lot. Mostly intentionally. And I try not to ever otherwise. But maybe you just need to make 5. I'm busy, James. I know you're busy. Everybody's busy. 5 minutes. You know, if I want to go to a nice restaurant, I make time to do it. If I want to watch a movie, I'll make time to do it. You know, when it was time when Wonder Woman came out, boy, I saw that movie. I saw it. It was good. It was wicked good. Wicked good. We love that movie. I still haven't brought you the disc, have I? I promised Megan she could borrow our disc. Sorry. Okay. It's always good to make a note. You all will hold me accountable next week. All right. But the truth is, practice. We find time to do what we want to do. If you want to make 5 minutes in the morning to just, when you open your eyes in the morning, just start your practice by saying, good morning, God. Thanks for a new day. If you're feeling really bad about something, don't be afraid to say, God, what is this all about? I'm really having a tough time with life right now. I'm really missing someone, or I'm really struggling with this issue, or I really can't make it through here. I'll tell you right now, I've started I gave you an assignment a while back, and I never stopped the assignment. We were talking about love. I don't even remember what it was, and I told you every night at dinner table or sometime to read 1 Corinthians 13. I've made it my practice now to read it in the morning, and I read it every night. Because I'm convinced as I read it and listen to it every single time, it's all about love, and I keep discovering new things about it, but the more I read it, the more it invades my heart. And it begins to shape the way I see everything. You know, right now, we only see in a mirror, a reflection in a mirror, then we'll see face to face. Well, the more I recognize the mirrors, the more I'm beginning to see a little bit of face to face with God in my everyday life. So maybe you find a scripture that really speaks to you. If you love the 23rd Psalm, read it. Read it every day. How long does it take to read something? And if you're by yourself, sometimes when I'm not by myself, Hannah will come into the room and say, Dad, were you talking to me? No, I was reading 1 Corinthians 13. Oh, Stop reading it out loud. Don't let anybody tell you what to do. Read it out loud. Let it speak to your heart. Let God speak to you. Read the scripture. Pray. Practice centering prayer. Practice it at home. You don't have to come to Tuesday night if you can't be available at 7 o'clock. There are lots of practices. If none of those sounds good to you, just look up spiritual practices online and find one that will speak to you. But practice, because without discipline you won't get to the other side. And be willing to take the risk on God, because God is willing to take the risk on you. So look at your life, your practices, your discipline. Well, that's what I found this week as I was reading the passage. God has been working on me on a lot of things this week. I was in the West Virginia house on Friday, thinking that the HughesNet guy was coming to install our internet on Friday. I looked at the email at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He was coming on Saturday. So, but God made me practice patience all day long. If you know me, that's not something I have in long suit. So all day long, I'd get up, I'd hear something, the fire would crackle in the wood stove, I'd peek out the window, nobody was there. Getting ticked off as the day went on, more and more angry, more and more angry, more and more frustrated, more and more impatient. At the end of the day, God and I had a wonderful laugh together, because the HughesNet guy was not even coming on Friday. I was there for no reason whatsoever but to sit with God, because in between those moments of impatience, I sat down and had centering prayer, and I practiced the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And I found some patience I never knew I had, because God was working on me. Apparently I need patience for some reason. I don't know what it is. So, go and be prepared for God to work on you, and take the risk necessary.